The morning started the way most mornings do for people who have spent decades in uniform. Quietly, without ceremony, without anyone watching. Major Annalise Carr woke before her alarm, folded back her blanket with the same deliberate hands that had folded maps in forward operating bases, and began the process of becoming presentable to the world. She pressed her service dress uniform the night before. She always did. Each crease sat exactly where it was supposed to sit, sharp enough to cut the morning light that came through her window. Her ribbons were arranged in their correct order, the way she had been taught, and the way she had never forgotten, each one representing something she did not talk about at dinner tables. She did not wear them for strangers. She wore them because the United States Marine Corps required her to, and she had spent 21 years doing what the United States Marine Corps required of her. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her cover, walked out the door, and went to work. The airport was the kind of place that swallows people whole. Gate after gate, row after row of plastic seats, the smell of chain coffee and recycled air, the constant noise of rolling luggage and muffled announcements. Annalisa moved through it the way she moved through most places, straight, steady, taking up exactly the space she needed and not a single inch more. She had learned that economy of presence a long time ago. Not in training, not from a manual, but from the accumulated experience of being a woman in a branch of service that was built, for most of its history, by and for men. She had learned to be visible in the ways that counted, and quiet in the ways that cost less energy. It was not a compromise she had made with bitterness. It was simply a fact she had come to understand, the way you come to understand the weight of a loaded pack. It is what it is, and you carry it, and you keep moving. She found her gate and sat down in the last seat in a row, back to the wall, the way she always preferred. She set her bag at her feet. She was early. She was always early. She pulled out a worn paperback and opened it to her page and let the noise of the terminal fade into background. That was when she heard him. Staff Sergeant Marcus Teal was the kind of man who filled a room before he entered it. His voice carried the particular confidence of someone who had never once been made to feel out of place, and who had come to mistake that comfort for authority. He was in uniform, young enough that his ribbons were still being earned, surrounded by 2 other servicemen who laughed at the right moments and agreed at the right moments because that is what people do around men like Teal. He noticed Annalise the way certain men notice certain things, not with curiosity, but with the immediate impulse to evaluate. His eyes moved across her uniform. He was looking for something wrong. When he did not find it, his face made the small, invisible adjustment that some people make when reality fails to cooperate with what they have already decided. He said it at a volume designed to be heard, not loud enough to be confrontational, not quiet enough to be private. The middle distance, the volume of a man performing for his audience. "I don't know what branch that's supposed to be," he said, nodding in her direction. "But she definitely took a wrong turn somewhere." One of the men beside him made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. The other looked at his phone. Annalise did not look up from her book. She had heard versions of this her entire career. In bases and briefings and dining facilities and parking lots. In meeting rooms where she was the only woman present and sometimes the most senior person in the room, and still someone would look past her to the man beside her when a question needed answering. She had heard it from strangers and, on more than one occasion, from people who should have known better. She had spent the first few years of her career being angry about it in the way that young people are angry, loudly, in her own chest, where it burned. She had spent the years after that learning what to do with the anger so that it did not burn through useful things. She turned a page. Teal, interpreting silence as validation, said something else. This one was sharper. It landed in the gate area the way a stone lands in still water. One point of contact, then rings spreading outward. A few people nearby shifted in their seats. A woman across the aisle looked up. An older man in civilian clothes frowned in the direction of the sound, and then looked at Annalise with the particular expression of someone waiting to see what she would do. She did nothing. Not because she could not. Not because she did not have words, or rank, or 21 years of evidence stacked in her favor. She did nothing because she had made a decision somewhere around her 10th year of service that she would not spend what she had earned defending it to people who had not done the work to understand it. Her record was not a debate. Her uniform was not a question. She let the room hold the moment. She let it sit. And then, from 2 seats to her left, a voice spoke. Colonel James Rourke had been watching since Teal first opened his mouth. He was 61 years old, retired 2 years prior after 34 years in the Marine Corps, and he had the specific patience of a man who has waited out longer silences than this one in more difficult rooms. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain jacket, no visible indication of who he was or what he had done. He had been reading a newspaper, and he folded it now with the deliberate calm of someone who has decided that a moment requires his participation. He stood up. He walked to where Teal was standing, and he looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Teal, sensing that something had shifted, straightened slightly, and offered the reflexive deference of a junior service member who does not yet know who he is talking to. "You know who that is?" Colonel Rourke asked. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about men who had held real authority for a long time. They had learned that volume is the tool of people who are not sure they will be listened to. Teal looked at Annalise, then back at Rourke. He shook his head once. "That," Colonel Rourke said, "is Major Annalise Carr. She has been in the Marine Corps for 21 years. She has done 3 combat tours. That ribbon there." He paused just long enough and pointed with a steady hand at the decoration second from the top of her left breast pocket, "is a bronze star with a V device. Do you know what the V stands for?" Teal said nothing. His jaw was doing something complicated. "It stands for valor," Colonel Rourke said. "It means she was recognized for acts of valor in direct combat with an enemy force. It means that she ran towards something that other people were running away from, and that she did it while other people were with her and needed her to, and that the United States military decided that what she did was worth putting a piece of metal on a ribbon and handing to her in front of everyone." He let that land. "There is also the matter of her rank," he continued, "which is major, which outranks you by several significant steps, and which she has held with a service record that most people in this airport combined could not replicate." The 2 men who had been standing with Teal had developed a sudden and intense interest in the floor. Teal looked at Annalise. She had, at some point during Colonel Rourke's quiet speech, closed her book and was now looking back at him, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of someone watching a person get what they deserve, just looking, with the same economy of expression that she brought to most things, clear, direct, and entirely unburdened by the need for him to feel any particular way about what had just happened. He opened his mouth. He said, "Ma'am, He stopped, started again. The word that came out of him was not an excuse. It was not an explanation. It was not the speech of a man trying to rebuild himself quickly in front of others. It was just, "I'm sorry." Plain, undecorated, the best he had. Annalisa looked at him for another second. Then she said something that no one else in the gate area expected. She said, "I know. Not I accept your apology. Not it's fine. Not you should be." 2 words that contained everything. That she was not surprised. That she did not require his remorse to know her own worth. That this moment was not the first and would probably not be the last. And that she had long since built something inside herself that did not depend on any of this for its foundation. Then she opened her book again. People who were at that gate talked about what they had seen for days afterward. Some of them posted about it. The story traveled the specific route that stories like this travel, from person to person, gathering small additions and losses along the way rivers gather and lose water, until it arrived at the place where stories like this eventually arrive, which is everywhere and nowhere, half true and fully felt. What the story kept, in every version, was the essential shape of it. A woman in uniform. A man who decided, without evidence and without invitation, that she did not belong. And the slow, quiet unfolding of how wrong he was. Not through argument, not through confrontation, but through the simple, irresistible weight of the truth. Teal was not a bad man. That was the uncomfortable part. The part that stories like this sometimes leave out because it makes the lesson harder to carry. He was a young man who had been shaped by a set of assumptions he had never been asked to examine, because the world he moved through had not yet handed him a moment that required it. He got that moment in an airport gate in front of strangers. It was not comfortable. It was, however, clarifying. He asked, later, through people who knew people, about Major Carr, about her record, about the tour where the Bronze Star was earned. He read what was available and sat with what he had read, and he did not make excuses for himself in the privacy of his own thinking. He understood, fully and without anyone to help him, what he had almost missed, what he had almost reduced to a bad joke in a terminal. He would not do it again. The ribbons on Annalise Carr's uniform were not decorative. They were, each of them, a location, a year, a decision made under pressure with incomplete information and real consequences. They were the physical record of a career that had asked things of her that most people will never be asked and would not know how to answer. The Bronze Star, with its small silver V, had been earned in a province where the heat made the air itself feel like an argument, and every road held the possibility of something terrible. She had been the officer in charge of a patrol that came under fire, and she had made the decisions that needed to be made in the time available to make them, which was not very much time at all. And 2 of the people who came home from that day came home because of choices she made under fire. She never talked about this at dinner tables. She never brought it up in conversation. She had been thanked by the 2 people who came home, and that was sufficient. And the rest was between her and the province and the heat and the impossible arithmetic of that afternoon. She had done this work for 21 years. She had done it in rooms that fell quiet when she walked in. She had done it in briefings where her recommendations were heard and then attributed, a sentence later, to the man sitting beside her. She had done it through a deployment when her daughter was 8 months old and starting to understand faces, and Annalise was 10,000 miles away making decisions that could not wait, and crying privately, and going back to work. She had done all of this without asking for credit, and without requiring an audience, and without making the work smaller than it was, in order to make other people more comfortable. She had done it because it was her vocation, because she was exceptionally good at it, because the Marine Corps, for all of its history and all of its imperfections, was also a place where what you could do eventually, stubbornly, loudly announced itself, and she had allowed her work to do that announcing for her. She did not need Staff Sergeant Marcus Teal to believe in her. She never had. She boarded her flight, and found her seat, and put her bag in the overhead compartment, and sat down, and pulled the seatbelt across her lap, and clicked it into place. The woman in the window seat glanced at her uniform the way civilians sometimes do, not with judgment but with a certain cautious respect, the look of someone who wants to say thank you but is not sure of the protocol. Annalise gave her a small smile, the kind that said, "You're fine, it's fine, we're fine." The woman smiled back and looked out the window. The plane taxied. The terminal fell away. The city spread out beneath them and then reduced itself to the geometry that cities always become from altitude. Grids and rivers and small moving things that you cannot identify individually anymore, only collectively, as life going on below. Annalise took out her book. She found her page. She read. Outside the window, the clouds moved past in their slow and indifferent way, and the plane climbed toward its altitude, and the morning became afternoon, and the world below continued being the world, complicated and imperfect and full of people in the middle of becoming who they would eventually be. She had 21 years of becoming behind her. She had more ahead. She turned the page. What people remembered most in the end was not what was said, it was what was not said, the way she sat, the way she did not rise to the moment because she had long since risen past it, the way her record spoke in a language that required no translation, only the willingness to stop and read it. No. She had always been exactly where she belonged. The room just needed a moment to catch up.